SpaceX gets permission to launch 7,500 next-generation Starlink broadband satellites. The U.S. Federal Communications Commission, FCC, has given Elon Musk's SpaceX the go-ahead to build and launch 7,500 of its second-generation Starlink satellites. However, the FCC only partially granted SpaceX the right to launch its constellation of non-geostationary orbit, NGSO, satellites. SpaceX had applied to launch 29,988 Generation 2 satellites. According to the FCC, SpaceX had launched more than 3,500 Gen 1 Starlink satellites as of October 2022. Welcome back to the Space Gaze. Before we proceed, kindly subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to stay updated when we release new videos. Without further delay, let's dive in. The 7,500 new satellites are approved to operate at altitudes of 525, 530, and 535 kilometers and inclinations of 53, 43, and 33 degrees, respectively, using frequencies in the Q and K band, the FCC notes. The FCC deferred consideration of SpaceX's application to use E-band frequencies and tracking beacons. The Commission also said it had reduced the number of authorized Generation 2 Starlink satellites, due in part to the issue of orbital debris and space safety. To address concerns about orbital debris and space safety, we limit this grant to 7,500 satellites only, operating at certain altitudes, and note that SpaceX has committed to requesting modification of its previously granted license for operations in the V-band so that it will incorporate those V-band operations into its Starlink Generation 2 system, rather than operating a separate system in the V-band. This means our action today does not increase the total number of satellites SpaceX is authorized to deploy, and in fact slightly reduces it, as compared to the total number of satellites SpaceX would potentially have deployed otherwise, the FCC notes in its decision. The FCC also demanded that SpaceX report mitigations it has put in place to avoid collisions in space, as well as instructing it to work with NASA to ensure continued availability of launch windows, and pause deployment of new satellites if satellite failures exceed a certain threshold. SpaceX's application attracted numerous objections from space stakeholders including SES Americom and O3b, Viasat, NASA and National Science Foundation, and Amazon's Kuiper. The FCC adopted some of them in the form of conditions on SpaceX, but quashed the petition from Dish Network Corporation to dismiss or deny the application. The first production Kuiper satellites will launch later on United Launch Alliance's Atlas V rocket. After that, it will use ULA's Vulcan rocket alongside newer heavy-lift rockets from Arianespace and Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin rocket firm. SpaceX filed its Generation 2 Starlink application in May 2020 with a request to operate 30,000 satellites at altitudes between 328 to 614 kilometers from Earth. SpaceX's current plan is to operate 29,988 Gen 2 satellites at altitudes ranging from 340 kilometers to 614 kilometers, with about two-thirds or 19,440 deployed at altitudes from 340 kilometers to 360 kilometers, below the International Space Station, ISS. About a third, or 10,080, of the new Starlink satellites would be deployed at altitudes from 525 kilometers to 535 kilometers, above ISS and below SpaceX's Gen 1 Starlink constellation. A further 468 satellites would be deployed into retrograde inclinations in shells centered at altitudes of 604 kilometers and 614 kilometers, above Gen 1 satellites. The FCC in August rejected Starlink's $885 million bid for rural broadband funds, with the commissioner branding it a nascent technology and raising concerns over its falling download speeds. SpaceX just got permission to begin building out the next generation of its Starlink Internet mega constellation. Our action will allow SpaceX to begin deployment of Generation 2 Starlink, which will bring next-generation satellite broadband to Americans nationwide, including those living and working in areas traditionally unserved or underserved by terrestrial systems. FCC officials wrote in Thursday's decision order, which you can find here. Our action also will enable worldwide satellite broadband service, helping to close the digital divide on a global scale. The ruling is just a partial victory for SpaceX, however. The company had applied for permission to deploy 29,988 Starlink 2.0 satellites around Earth. The FCC is deferring a decision about the rest of the envisioned spacecraft. The FCC granted just the limited approval to address concerns about orbital debris and space safety, agency officials wrote in Thursday's decision document. These and other issues were raised by interested parties regarding the Starlink 2.0 application, which SpaceX filed in 2020. We also adopt requirements that require SpaceX to report mitigation actions taken to avoid collisions in space, coordinate and collaborate with NASA to ensure continued availability of launch windows and on other matters, and pause deployment of new satellites if satellite failures exceed a certain threshold, the FCC document states. Those aren't the only concerns people have raised about Starlink. SpaceX already had FCC permission to deploy 12,000 first-generation Starlink satellites, each of which weighs roughly 660 pounds, 300 kilograms. The company has lofted a significant proportion of that number. More than 3,200 Starlink spacecraft are beaming internet service to users around the world at the moment, according to astrophysicist and satellite tracker Jonathan McDowell. Starlink 2.0 satellites will be much larger and more capable than their predecessors, SpaceX founder and CEO Elon Musk has said. The new craft will tip the scales at about 1.25 tons, 1,130 kilograms, and will be able to beam service directly to cell phones. Indeed, a few months ago, SpaceX announced plans to do just that starting in 2023 via a partnership with T-Mobile. SpaceX plans to loft the lion's share of the new Starlink satellites using Starship, its huge new Mars and Moon rocket. Starship is still under development, but the enormous vehicle could launch on its first orbital test flight in the coming weeks. All Starlink spacecraft to date have launched atop the Falcon 9, SpaceX's workhorse rocket. The metric of 100 object years, Leia Labs proposes provides a useful benchmark, if triggered, for pausing deployment and reassessing spacecraft reliability, the FCC said. We recognize that this metric is, as SpaceX observes, new and untested, but we believe an incremental approach based on a clear benchmark is appropriate in the context of a planned deployment that is at a scale not previously undertaken and also untested. The partial order doesn't mean that SpaceX won't ever be allowed to launch the remaining 75% of its Generation 2 satellites. The order appears to be the FCC's way of buying some time as it evaluates the ways in which mega-constellations can mess things up and to figure out the best ways of regulating this emerging technology. Moreover, what the FCC is asking SpaceX to do is not unreasonable and is, in my opinion, quite necessary. SpaceX might not love this approach, but I think it's smart, and I'm relieved to see the FCC is finally chomping down hard on these issues. It's still the Wild West when it comes to regulating space, but the FCC, it would appear, is trying to keep up with the rapidly changing landscape that is the spaceflight industry. That's all I have for you guys for today. If you liked watching this video, please make sure to click the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the bell icon so that you may be notified when we upload a new video. Thanks for watching.